If you were handed $50 with the expectation to return it in a week, how would you react? For most, it might seem like an insignificant amount, just enough for a meal or two. But for me, a man scraping by on the unforgiving streets, it was a lifeline. That $50 note wasn't just currency, it was a test, a challenge, and ultimately, the catalyst for a transformation that would lead me from homelessness to the heights of business success. This is my story. It's not just about rising above poverty, but about resilience, choices, and the unexpected turns that define a life well lived. Each chapter of this journey reveals a lesson, a struggle, and a triumph, proving that even from the darkest corners, light can emerge. Stay with me as I unfold a tale that begins with nothing and ends with everything, not just in wealth, but in purpose, fulfillment, and the joy of giving back. My life on the streets was a blur of exhaustion, hunger, and the relentless ache of loneliness. Each day bled into the next, defined by the same rituals, scouring trash bins for remnants of food, seeking shelter from the biting cold, and dodging the pitying or judgmental gazes of passers-by. Time lost its meaning when every moment was spent surviving. I wasn't always homeless. My descent into this life felt as if it happened overnight, though in truth, it was the culmination of 1,000 bad decisions and a handful of misfortunes. There was a time when I had a roof over my head, a steady job, and even dreams. But a layoff here, a missed rent payment there, and the dominoes began to fall. Soon enough, I found myself clutching a tattered blanket in an alleyway, the echoes of the world's indifference ringing in my ears. Pride is a strange thing. Even when I was at my lowest, it held me back from asking for help. It was as if admitting I needed assistance would solidify the failure I already felt I embodied. Instead, I relied on scraps and luck, convincing myself that tomorrow might somehow be better without any real plan to make it so. And yet, there were moments of grace, rare glimpses of humanity that reminded me the world wasn't entirely cold. A stranger once handed me a sandwich without saying a word. Another time, a busker shared his spot under a bridge during a storm. These small acts sustained me, not just physically but emotionally, hinting that maybe, just maybe, there was still hope. One such moment came on an unremarkable afternoon. I was sitting on a cracked sidewalk, watching the world rush by, when a man in a pressed suit stopped in front of me. He didn't look like the type to linger near someone like me, but there he was, crouched down to my level, extending a crisp $50 bill. "Return this in a week," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. Then, without waiting for a response, he walked away, leaving me stunned. For a long time, I just stared at the money, unsure if it was real or some cruel joke. $50. To most people, it might seem like pocket change, but to me, it was a fortune. The sheer weight of responsibility behind his words, "return this in a week," felt almost paralyzing. How was I supposed to make money, let alone return it, when I couldn't even feed myself? But beneath the doubt, a spark of curiosity flickered. What if this was my chance? What if, instead of letting this moment slip by, I found a way to make it work? For the first time in years, I felt something stir inside me, our fragile sense of purpose. That night, as I lay on a piece of cardboard under a graffiti-covered overpass, I clutched the $50 note like a lifeline. Ideas churned in my mind, each one more far-fetched than the last. The temptation to simply spend it and forget the man's demand was strong, but so was the pull to prove, to myself, if no one else, that I was capable of something more. By morning, I had a plan. It wasn't foolproof, but it was a start. I decided to invest the money, not in food or temporary comfort, but in something that could generate more. There was a convenience store nearby that sold small coolers, and I'd noticed how kids and families swarmed the parks during weekends. Ice cream. It was a long shot, but it was better than sitting idly and letting the days slip away. With trembling hands, I walked into the store and purchased the cheapest cooler they had. The remaining cash went toward a small stash of ice cream bars. It was a risk, one I couldn't afford to fail. The first day was a whirlwind of trial and error. I stationed myself near the park's entrance, trying to muster the confidence to approach potential customers. The first few hours were demoralizing, most people ignored me, and others waved me off without a second glance. But then, as the afternoon heat peaked, someone stopped. A mother with 2 children bought 3 bars, handing me a few crumpled bills. It wasn't much, but it felt like a victory. By the end of the day, I had sold out. The profit was modest, but it was proof that the idea had potential. For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of pride. I'd taken a chance, and it had paid off, however small the reward. That night, as I counted my earnings under the dim light of a street lamp, I couldn't help but think of the man who had given me the $50. His gesture had been more than charity, it had been a challenge, a push to see what I could do. And for the first time in years, I believed I could do something. This was only the beginning. The day I sold my first batch of ice cream bars felt like a lifeline, a flicker of light piercing the fog of my existence. But survival is never a single act, it's a series of decisions, each one more crucial than the last. The $50 note had sparked something inside me, but it was up to me to fan that flame into something sustainable. The question wasn't just how to make money, but how to keep it coming. With the small profit I'd made, I replenished my stock the next morning. This time, I approached the park with a little more confidence, my cooler slung over my shoulder. I realized that location mattered, the busiest parts of the park attracted families, joggers, and picnickers. Timing was everything, too. The heat of the afternoon made ice cream irresistible, turning my modest venture into a small but steady stream of sales. I began to refine my pitch, testing out which phrases caught people's attention. My initial awkwardness faded as I leaned into the role. I learned to anticipate the moments when parents would glance at their children and cave to their pleas for a treat. I became a keen observer of human behavior, attuned to subtle cues that signaled a potential sale. But not every day was a success. Rainy afternoons meant no customers. Once, I underestimated the heat and found myself with melted, unsellable stock. Another time, a man in a park uniform approached me, claiming I needed a permit to sell. Panic surged through me as I tried to explain that I was just trying to survive, but he didn't seem interested in my story. Fortunately, he let me off with a warning, but the encounter left me shaken. I realized that even this small endeavor wasn't without risks. Still, the setbacks didn't deter me. I started keeping meticulous track of my earnings and expenses, jotting down numbers on scraps of paper I kept in my pocket. It was basic math, but it gave me a sense of control over something, a feeling I hadn't had in years. Each day, I set aside a portion of my earnings to reinvest in more stock, slowly building a rhythm. Word began to spread about the ice cream guy in the park. Regulars started recognizing me, and some even struck up conversations. A jogger once told me that seeing me out there every day inspired him to push harder during his runs. It was a strange feeling, knowing that I, a man who had been invisible for so long, was now a small but steady presence in people's lives. With each passing day, my confidence grew. I started experimenting with different products, adding bottled water and soft drinks to my cooler. These items had a higher profit margin, and they sold well alongside the ice cream. I found myself waking up with a sense of purpose, eager to see how much I could earn that day. It wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about building something. But the streets have a way of humbling you. One evening, as I was packing up for the day, a group of teenagers approached me. At first, I thought they were interested in buying, but their intentions quickly became clear. They surrounded me, mocking my makeshift business and taunting me for being homeless. One of them grabbed my cooler and tipped it over, spilling its contents onto the ground. I froze, paralyzed by a mix of fear and humiliation. For a moment, I thought about fighting back, but I knew it wouldn't end well. Instead, I waited until they left, their laughter echoing in my ears. As I knelt to pick up the ruined stock, tears stung my eyes. It felt like everything I'd worked for was crumbling, and for a fleeting moment, I wanted to give up. But then I thought of the man who had given me the $50. He hadn't just handed me money, he'd handed me a challenge. And if I gave up now, I'd be letting him, and myself, down. I couldn't let one bad day define my journey. The next morning, I returned to the park. My cooler was lighter, my stock smaller, but my resolve was intact. Slowly but surely, I rebuilt what I'd lost. Each sale felt like a small victory, a reminder that resilience was my greatest asset. A week later, I stood on the same street corner where I'd met the man in the suit. I clutched $50 in my hand, waiting for him to appear. But as the hours passed, it became clear he wasn't coming back. Part of me felt disappointed. I'd wanted to show him what I'd done with his money. But another part of me realized that this wasn't about him. The $50 had been a spark, but the fire was mine to tend. From that day on, I stopped thinking of myself as a homeless man trying to get by. I was a hustler, an entrepreneur in the making. And this was just the beginning of my climb. The park had become my proving ground. Each day, I returned with my cooler and a renewed determination to make something of myself. The small profits I earned began to pile up, not just in the form of cash, but in the newfound sense of purpose that propelled me forward. But ambition has a way of stirring up questions. What's next? How do I grow from here? It started with a reinvestment. My ice cream profits allowed me to purchase a sturdier cooler and diversify my offerings. Beyond the usual bars and cones, I added chips, soft drinks, and even small sandwiches to my repertoire. These additions required careful planning, managing stock, gauging demand, and ensuring I had enough cash to keep the cycle running. Yet, for the first time in years, I relished the complexity. It wasn't a struggle, it was a challenge. The park regulars took notice. Parents praised my expanded selection, joggers appreciated the bottled water, and kids squealed with delight at the variety of treats. Word of mouth brought new customers, and soon, I was selling out faster than I anticipated. My success became a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it reinforced my belief that I was on the right path. On the other, it highlighted the limits of what I could achieve with just a cooler and a single pair of hands. As my confidence grew, so did my desire to expand. I began to study the park's rhythms, noting peak times and high-traffic areas. With the money I saved, I invested in a small cart. It wasn't fancy, but it was an upgrade. The extra space allowed me to carry more stock, and the wheels made it easier to move to different locations. I felt like a true entrepreneur, adapting and evolving to meet demand. But the path forward was far from smooth. Not everyone welcomed my success. Other street vendors, those who had long staked their claim to the park, viewed me as an interloper. Some confronted me directly, warning me to stay out of their territory. One even threatened to report me for operating without a proper license. The fear of losing everything gnawed at me, but I refused to back down. I'd come too far to be intimidated. Then came the health inspector. I was halfway through a busy afternoon when he appeared, clipboard in hand and a no-nonsense demeanor. My heart sank as he approached. He asked to see my permits, and I stammered through an explanation about trying to get back on my feet. His expression didn't soften, but instead of shutting me down, he handed me a list of requirements and told me to get my paperwork in order. It was a reprieve, but also a wake-up call. If I wanted to keep going, I needed to legitimize my operation. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of bureaucracy. I spent hours navigating city offices, filling out forms, and scraping together fees. Each step felt like climbing a mountain, but the sense of accomplishment when I finally held my license was indescribable. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was proof that I was no longer surviving, I was building. With legitimacy came new opportunities. I expanded my operation to include a second cart, hiring a fellow park dweller to help with sales. It felt surreal to go from struggling to feed myself to providing someone else with a source of income. The camaraderie we shared reminded me of the importance of community, a lesson I'd carry with me as I continued to grow. But growth brought its own challenges. Managing 2 carts meant juggling schedules, monitoring inventory, and ensuring consistent quality. There were days when it felt overwhelming, when the weight of responsibility threatened to crush the fragile momentum I'd built. Yet, each time doubt crept in, I thought back to the $50 bill and the man who'd handed it to me. He hadn't just given me money, he'd given me a reason to believe in myself. Then, the unexpected happened. A local newspaper reporter, intrigued by my story, approached me for an interview. Reluctant at first, I eventually agreed. A week later, my face was splashed across the features section under the headline, "From Homeless to Hustler, One Man's Journey to Success." The article brought a surge of attention. Customers flocked to the park, eager to support my venture. Some brought their own stories of struggle and triumph, sharing words of encouragement that bolstered my resolve. The newfound visibility opened doors I hadn't even considered. A small catering company reached out, offering me a partnership to supply desserts for their events. It was a leap into uncharted territory, but one I embraced wholeheartedly. I rented a small storage space to accommodate larger orders and began experimenting with new products. The business was no longer just a means of survival, it was a platform for growth, creativity, and connection. As I stood in the park one evening, watching the carts I'd built from scratch bustling with activity, I felt a surge of pride. The journey had been anything but easy, yet each hurdle had shaped me into the person I was becoming. I wasn't just selling treats, I was building a future, one decision at a time. But I knew this was only the beginning. The lessons I'd learned so far had prepared me for something greater. The question wasn't whether I'd succeed, but how far I could go. And as the sun set over the park, I resolved to keep climbing, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The decision to expand my horizons came with the realization that the park, as successful as it had been for me, wasn't the final destination. It was a stepping stone. The surge of customers from the newspaper article had been incredible, but it also exposed the limits of my operation. I needed to branch out, explore other opportunities, and create a foundation for something bigger. One day, as I was closing up my cart, I overheard a conversation between two people discussing the rise of food delivery services. The concept intrigued me. Delivery couriers were in high demand, and I already had a work ethic built on persistence and adaptability. The idea planted a seed in my mind, and soon, I was exploring what it would take to join this new wave of opportunity. Using some of the money I had saved, I bought a second-hand bicycle, a basic but sturdy model that was just good enough to get me started. My plan was simple: work as a courier during the hours when the park was less busy, maximizing my income while learning the ropes of a new industry. It was a gamble, but one that I was willing to take. The early days as a courier were grueling. Navigating the city's traffic on a bicycle was an entirely different challenge. I quickly learned to anticipate sudden car doors opening, dodge jaywalking pedestrians, and memorize the maze-like streets. The physical strain was immense, my legs burned, and my back ached from carrying heavy delivery bags. But each successful drop-off brought a small sense of accomplishment. I was no longer just scraping by, I was finding ways to grow. Despite the difficulties, there were moments of unexpected joy. Delivering to families who greeted me with warm smiles or watching a child's face light up as I handed over a birthday cake reminded me why I was doing this. The grind felt less daunting when I could see the impact of my work, however small. But the challenges didn't stop at traffic and fatigue. One night, during a late delivery, my bicycle chain snapped. Stranded in an unfamiliar part of the city, I felt a familiar pang of despair creeping in. The delivery was already late, and the prospect of walking miles back to my storage space with a broken bike seemed insurmountable. Yet, even in that moment, I refused to give up. I called the customer to explain the situation, and to my surprise, they offered to pick up the order themselves. Their kindness reignited my determination, reminding me that setbacks were temporary. With each passing week, I became more efficient. I studied maps obsessively, learning shortcuts and back alleys that saved time. I invested in a repair kit for my bike, ensuring I could handle minor breakdowns on the go. Slowly but surely, I built a reputation for reliability. Customers began requesting me by name, and the extra tips started to add up. As my courier work gained traction, I noticed something profound happening within me. The resilience I developed on the streets and as a vendor was now manifesting in new ways. I was no longer afraid of challenges, instead, I saw them as puzzles to solve. The confidence that had once felt so distant was now a part of my daily life. Yet, it wasn't just the work that shaped me during this period. The people I met along the way left lasting impressions. One delivery brought me to the office of a small startup. The team inside was young, enthusiastic, and buzzing with ideas. Watching them reminded me of the dreams I used to have before life took a turn. They invited me to join them for a coffee after my delivery, and we ended up talking for hours about their vision and goals. That interaction planted another seed in my mind, the idea that I could aspire to something beyond physical labor. But inspiration wasn't always enough. There were moments of exhaustion when I questioned whether I was pushing myself too hard. On one particularly grueling day, I miscalculated my route and arrived at a drop-off nearly an hour late. The customer's frustration was evident, and I left feeling defeated. It was a reminder that even with hard work, perfection was unattainable. As the months went on, I began to see patterns in my work, trends in customer preferences, peak delivery times, and the logistical inefficiencies of certain routes. My entrepreneurial instincts kicked in. What if I could offer a more specialized service? What if I could combine my experience as a vendor with the growing demand for reliable delivery? The possibilities were endless, but I knew I needed to take one step at a time. By the end of my first year as a courier, I had saved enough to consider my next move. The bicycle that had carried me through countless deliveries was now a symbol of my progress, but it was also a reminder that I couldn't stay in this role forever. My time on the streets, in the park, and as a courier had taught me one crucial lesson: growth requires change. Standing at the crossroads of my journey, I felt a sense of anticipation. The courier years had been transformative, teaching me discipline, perseverance, and the value of hard work. But I was ready to climb higher. The next chapter awaited, and with it, a new set of challenges to conquer. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving, and I was determined to see how far I could go. The transition from courier to office worker was as abrupt as it was surreal. One day, I was pedaling through the city with deliveries strapped to my back, and the next, I found myself in a modest office, staring at a computer screen I barely knew how to use. It wasn't luck that brought me here, though. It was the connection I had made with the team at the startup who had invited me for coffee. That conversation planted the idea in their minds that I was more than just a delivery guy, and, perhaps, it planted the idea in me too. The offer came a few weeks later. They needed someone to manage inventory and coordinate deliveries as they scaled up their operations. The position was entry-level, but to me, it was a golden opportunity. It felt like the first real break I'd had in years, a chance to prove that I could thrive in a professional environment. The pay was modest, but the potential was enormous. Walking into the office on my first day, I was overwhelmed by how different it felt from the life I'd been living. The hum of computers, the buzz of conversations, the faint smell of coffee, it was a world apart from the park or the streets I used to roam. My nerves were palpable, but I reminded myself that I'd faced far greater challenges. If I could survive on the streets, I could navigate this. The learning curve was steep. My technical skills were practically non-existent, and I had to spend hours after work watching tutorials and reading manuals just to keep up. Simple tasks that others seemed to breeze through took me twice as long. I often stayed late, not because anyone asked me to, but because I needed to prove to myself that I could master this new role. One of the biggest hurdles was overcoming imposter syndrome. I constantly felt like I didn't belong, as though everyone else could see I was out of place. But instead of letting that fear paralyze me, I used it as fuel. I asked questions, observed how others worked, and soaked up knowledge like a sponge. Slowly but surely, I began to find my footing. It wasn't just the technical skills that were new to me. Office culture itself was a puzzle. Learning to communicate professionally, navigating team dynamics, and participating in meetings, all of it felt foreign. I remember one particularly embarrassing moment when I misunderstood an email and sent a response that was overly casual. My supervisor gently corrected me, and while I felt mortified, I used it as a learning experience. Every misstep became a stepping stone. As I gained confidence, I started to notice opportunities for improvement within the company's operations. My experience as a courier gave me insights into logistics that others hadn't considered. I proposed changes to the delivery routes and inventory system, small adjustments that ended up saving the company time and money. To my surprise, my suggestions were not only implemented but also praised. For the first time, I felt like I was contributing something meaningful. But just as I was beginning to find my rhythm, an unexpected challenge threatened to derail everything. The startup hit a rough patch financially. A key investor pulled out, and rumors of layoffs began circulating. The tension in the office was palpable, and I couldn't shake the fear that I might lose the job that had become my lifeline. Rather than succumbing to panic, I decided to take action. I volunteered to take on additional responsibilities, stepping into roles that others had vacated as the team shrank. I worked harder than ever, determined to prove my value. It was exhausting, but it paid off. When the dust settled, I was one of the few employees who remained. That period of uncertainty taught me the importance of adaptability. It wasn't just about working hard, it was about showing that I could pivot and rise to meet new challenges. It reinforced the resilience I developed over the years and deepened my commitment to seizing every opportunity. As the company began to stabilize, my role continued to evolve. I was promoted to a position that involved coordinating with clients, a role that required me to step out of my comfort zone and develop new skills. Speaking with clients was daunting at first, but it also helped me refine my communication abilities and expand my professional network. The relationships I built during this time proved invaluable. One client, impressed by my work ethic and problem-solving skills, offered me a freelance project outside of my job. It was a small gig, but it opened my eyes to the possibility of diversifying my income and exploring new avenues. The idea of being more than an employee, of becoming a business person in my own right, began to take root. Looking back, my time at the startup was transformative. It wasn't just a job, it was a crash course in resilience, adaptability, and professional growth. I entered that office as a nervous outsider, unsure of my place, and left as someone who had not only found his footing but also discovered his potential. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but I knew one thing for sure: I was ready to keep climbing. The idea of becoming a business person was intoxicating. It lingered in my thoughts long after that first freelance project. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to the twists and turns of life, I was envisioning a future I could create for myself. The startup job had stabilized my life, but the spark of entrepreneurship ignited something deeper: ambition. The freelance gig had been simple, coordinating logistics for a local event. Yet, the satisfaction I felt was immense. I had solved problems, met deadlines, and delivered results on my own terms. It was a small taste of independence, and I wanted more. I began exploring side hustles during my off hours. My first venture was an extension of what I knew best: logistics. Using the skills I had developed as a courier and at the startup, I started offering delivery coordination services to small businesses. These were mom-and-pop stores that couldn't afford full-scale delivery solutions but still needed reliable options. I leveraged the connections I'd built in my previous roles, cold calling and emailing potential clients late into the night. At first, the response was tepid. Many businesses were hesitant to trust a one-man operation, and I faced countless rejections. But each no sharpened my pitch, and eventually, the yes started coming in. A local bakery was my first steady client, followed by a florist and a small bookstore. With each new account, my confidence grew. The early days were chaotic. I juggled my full-time job, freelance gigs, and this fledgling business all at once. My apartment became a makeshift office, cluttered with notebooks, receipts, and a second-hand laptop I'd bought to manage my operations. Sleep was a luxury I could rarely afford, but the adrenaline of building something from the ground up kept me going. But entrepreneurship wasn't just about hard work, it was about learning to adapt and innovate. One of my biggest early challenges came when a bakery order went disastrously wrong. A delivery was delayed, and the customer was furious. The incident threatened to ruin my budding reputation. Instead of making excuses, I apologized profusely, refunded the fee, and offered a free future delivery. It was a costly mistake, but the bakery owner appreciated my accountability and continued working with me. From that moment, I made it a rule to prioritize customer satisfaction above all else. As my client base expanded, I faced another hurdle: scaling. My bike, which had served me so well as a courier, was no longer sufficient for the volume of deliveries I was managing. After weeks of deliberation, I took a leap of faith and bought a used van. It was a significant investment, one that wiped out most of my savings, but it transformed my business. With the van, I could handle larger orders and serve clients outside my immediate area. The van also allowed me to diversify my services. I began offering event logistics, helping clients transport supplies and set up for weddings, corporate gatherings, and community fairs. These projects were more lucrative than regular deliveries, but they also came with higher stakes. One memorable event involved transporting delicate floral arrangements for a high-profile wedding. The pressure was immense, but the successful execution earned me glowing referrals that brought in even more business. The entrepreneurial spark that had driven me to this point began to evolve into a full-fledged flame. I realized that if I wanted my business to grow, I needed to think strategically. I started reading books on entrepreneurship, attending workshops, and networking with other small business owners. These interactions were invaluable, exposing me to ideas and practices I hadn't considered before. One of the most transformative moments came when I met a mentor at a local business seminar. He was a seasoned entrepreneur who had built and sold multiple companies. Intrigued by my story, he offered to meet for coffee and share his insights. That conversation was a turning point. He taught me about the importance of branding, customer retention, and scaling operations sustainably. He also encouraged me to think bigger, to envision what my business could become 5 or 10 years down the line. Inspired by his advice, I decided to rebrand my operation. I gave my business a name, something professional and memorable, and invested in a simple but effective website. The response was immediate. Clients began taking me more seriously, and new inquiries started pouring in. It felt like a validation of all the effort I had poured into this venture. Yet, the road was far from smooth. There were days when I doubted myself, when setbacks made me question whether I was in over my head. But every challenge I faced reminded me of the resilience I had built over the years. I thought back to the streets, the park, the courier days, and the startup job. Each phase of my journey had prepared me for this moment. As I stood in my tiny apartment one evening, surrounded by the tools of my trade, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. My business was still small, but it was mine. It represented not just a livelihood, but a dream, a testament to how far I had come. And while the path ahead was uncertain, I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't just climbing anymore. I was building, step by step, towards a future I could be proud of. Growth feels like a victory, but it comes with an unforgiving set of challenges. As my business expanded, I was met with new pressures, tighter margins, higher stakes, and more responsibilities. The adrenaline that had propelled me through the early days now gave way to the relentless grind of managing logistics, staff, and client expectations. The first hurdle I faced was financial instability. While my client base was growing, so were my expenses. The van, my greatest asset, began to show its age, needing constant repairs that chipped away at my savings. At times, I found myself juggling which bills to pay: a late supplier invoice here, a postponed repair there. These decisions haunted me during sleepless nights as I questioned if I'd overstepped my capabilities. Competition presented the next obstacle. Word of my services had spread, but this also attracted larger, more established businesses into the space. They undercut my prices, wielding resources I couldn't match. I realized I couldn't compete on price alone, so I pivoted to offering unmatched personal service. I tailored my deliveries, remembered clients' preferences, and ensured their satisfaction at every step. This strategy worked, but maintaining such high-touch service required constant vigilance and energy. Internal challenges emerged just as external ones eased. My expanding business required additional help, so I brought on part-time staff. Managing people proved far more difficult than I'd expected. Training them, resolving conflicts, and ensuring consistent service quality stretched me thin. A botched delivery here, a missed order there, each mistake felt like a personal failure. Worse, I lacked the managerial experience to address issues effectively, leaving me frustrated and uncertain. The deepest blow came when a trusted employee betrayed me. This person, someone I had mentored and relied on, decided to leave and start a competing business. Worse, they poached several of my loyal clients. The betrayal stung on multiple levels, financially, professionally, and emotionally. I felt foolish for trusting too easily, but the experience taught me a harsh but necessary lesson: loyalty cannot be assumed, and safeguarding my business is just as critical as growing it. Despite these struggles, there were moments of clarity that fueled my determination. I began delegating more effectively, training my staff to handle tasks independently. I also hired a part-time accountant to ensure my finances were in order, freeing me to focus on the bigger picture. These changes weren't easy for someone as hands-on as me, but they were necessary for the business's long-term stability. A turning point came when I revisited advice from my mentor about sustainable growth. I realized I'd been too focused on expanding quickly, overlooking the importance of a solid foundation. By streamlining my operations and focusing on high-margin services, I eased some of the financial strain. Gradually, the business became more stable, and I felt more in control. One of the most unexpected rewards of these struggles was the resilience they fostered. Each setback forced me to think creatively, adapt, and find solutions where none seemed apparent. The challenges didn't vanish, but they became more manageable as I learned to face them head-on. Support from loyal clients, friends, and even other entrepreneurs became a lifeline during tough times. Their belief in my abilities often bolstered my own confidence, reminding me why I had started this journey. I realized that success wasn't about avoiding failure, but about learning from it and persevering. By the end of this phase, my business had evolved into something stronger and more resilient. I was no longer the same scrappy entrepreneur who relied solely on grit and determination. I had grown into a more strategic thinker, capable of navigating the complexities of business growth. The journey ahead still promised challenges, but I felt ready to face them, armed with the lessons I had learned. By the time my business began to truly stabilize, I felt a cautious optimism that had eluded me for years. The lessons from my struggles had made me sharper and more deliberate. Slowly but surely, I was no longer running from failure but building toward a future defined by purpose and pride. This phase of my journey marked the first taste of tangible success, though it came with decisions that would shape my character and test my values. One of the most gratifying aspects of my early success was seeing the tangible fruits of my labor. My client base had expanded to include larger, more established businesses, and the steady stream of orders gave me a sense of security that had once seemed impossible. With improved cash flow, I was able to reinvest in the business, upgrading equipment, renting a small office space, and hiring full-time staff. Each improvement felt like a step away from the instability that had once defined my life. However, early success brought new dilemmas. As the business grew, so did the opportunities and the ethical decisions that came with them. One potential client, a major retailer, offered a lucrative contract that could significantly boost my revenue. The catch? Their terms required me to cut corners in ways that conflicted with the values I'd built my business on. The decision weighed heavily on me. On one hand, it was a chance to secure financial growth. On the other, it risked eroding the trust one had worked so hard to build with my existing clients. In the end, I chose to walk away from the deal, prioritizing integrity over short-term gains. The decision was painful, but it reinforced my commitment to building a business I could be proud of. As my reputation grew, so did my network. I began attending industry events and joining local business groups, connecting with others who shared my entrepreneurial spirit. These interactions were both inspiring and humbling. I met seasoned professionals who offered guidance and insight, as well as peers who were navigating their own challenges. One particularly memorable connection came during a community event where I met a well-known philanthropist. Intrigued by my story, he invited me to collaborate on a project aimed at supporting small businesses in underserved areas. The partnership not only broadened my perspective but also deepened my sense of purpose. Despite these achievements, success did not shield me from unexpected crises. A sudden economic downturn caused several of my clients to scale back their orders, creating a ripple effect on my operations. It was a stark reminder that no business, no matter how well run, is immune to external forces. To weather the storm, I leaned on the resilience I had cultivated during my toughest times. I reduced overhead costs, negotiated flexible terms with suppliers, and focused on diversifying my client base to mitigate future risks. This period also brought a surprising personal milestone, reconnecting with someone from my past. A chance encounter with an old acquaintance from my days on the streets brought back a flood of memories. He was still struggling, caught in the same cycle I had fought so hard to escape. Seeing him was a powerful reminder of how far I had come, but it also reignited a sense of responsibility to give back. I began exploring ways to use my resources and platform to support others facing similar struggles. This became a cornerstone of my vision for the business, intertwining profitability with social impact. Through these experiences, I discovered the deeper meaning of success. It wasn't just about financial stability or professional recognition, it was about creating a legacy that extended beyond myself. The business had started as a means of survival, but it was evolving into something much greater, a vehicle for growth, connection, and giving back. As I stood in my office one evening, surrounded by the hum of activity and the energy of my team, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Early success had not come easily, but it had arrived with lessons that would guide me through the chapters yet to come. I knew there were still challenges ahead, but for the first time, I felt ready to embrace them with open arms and a clear vision of what I wanted to achieve. As the business grew and matured, I realized that my role was shifting. I was no longer just an entrepreneur hustling to make ends meet, I was becoming a leader. This transformation brought new challenges and responsibilities, forcing me to re-evaluate not only how I ran the business but also how I carried myself. Leadership, I learned, wasn't about authority, it was about inspiring and guiding others toward a shared vision. One of the most pivotal moments in this phase came when I decided to expand my team significantly. Up until then, I had kept the operation lean, relying on a small, tight-knit group to manage day-to-day tasks. But as demand grew, it became clear that I needed more hands on deck. Hiring a larger team meant not just delegating more tasks, but also fostering a culture that aligned with the values I had built the business on. At first, the expansion was chaotic. Onboarding new employees while maintaining service quality stretched me thin. Miscommunications were frequent, and morale fluctuated as we navigated the growing pains of scaling up. I realized that my hands-on approach, which had served me well in the early days, was no longer sustainable. I needed to learn how to empower others, to trust my team to take ownership of their roles. This shift required me to invest heavily in training and development. I organized workshops, brought in industry experts, and spent time mentoring my team one-on-one. The effort paid off. Over time, I began to see the team gel, their confidence growing as they mastered new skills and responsibilities. It was a proud moment to watch them take initiative, solving problems, and delivering results without my constant oversight. Leadership also meant making tough decisions. One of the hardest came during a period of financial uncertainty. A new project, which I had poured significant resources into, wasn't yielding the returns I had anticipated. Continuing to fund it would jeopardize the stability of the entire business. After much deliberation, I made the call to cut our losses and shut it down. It was a painful decision, but it reinforced an important lesson: leadership requires clarity and the courage to prioritize the greater good. As I settled into my role as a leader, I began to focus more on the broader vision for the business. I wanted it to be more than just a profitable venture, I wanted it to have a positive impact on the community. Inspired by my own journey, I launched initiatives aimed at supporting those who, like me, were starting from scratch. We began offering internships to individuals from underserved backgrounds, providing them with the skills and experience needed to build their own careers. One of the most rewarding moments came when an intern who had joined us with little experience was promoted to a full-time role. Watching her thrive, seeing her confidence grow with each achievement, reminded me why I had started this journey in the first place. Her success felt like a reflection of the opportunities one had been given and the determination that had carried me forward. But leadership wasn't just about looking outward, it was also about self-reflection. I spent time examining my own habits and tendencies, seeking feedback from my team and mentors. I discovered areas where I needed to grow, whether it was improving my communication skills or learning to manage stress more effectively. This process of introspection wasn't always comfortable, but it was essential for my development as a leader. Another turning point came when the business reached a level of recognition I had never imagined. Industry awards, media coverage, and invitations to speak at events brought a new level of visibility. With this visibility came a responsibility to set an example, not just for my team but for the broader community of aspiring entrepreneurs who looked to me for inspiration. Through these experiences, I came to understand that leadership is a journey, not a destination. It's about continuously learning, adapting, and striving to bring out the best in yourself and others. As I stood before my team during our annual meeting, outlining our goals for the year ahead, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment. We were no longer just a business, we were a community, united by a shared purpose and a commitment to growth. Looking back, I could see how far I had come, from the streets, to the park, to the boardroom. Each step had prepared me for this moment, shaping me into the person I needed to be. And as I looked ahead, I knew that the journey was far from over. There were still mountains to climb, challenges to overcome, and opportunities to seize. But for the first time, I felt truly ready to lead the way. The journey from surviving on the streets to leading a thriving business felt like an odyssey, one marked by perseverance, resilience, and an unyielding belief in the possibility of change. Yet, as I reached new heights, I found myself reflecting more on the origins of my journey. The transformation I had undergone wasn't just about escaping hardship, it was about using that hardship as a foundation to build something meaningful. As I stood at the summit of my career, I realized it was time to give back in ways I had only dreamed of. One of the first initiatives I launched was a mentorship program for individuals facing adversity. I partnered with local shelters and community organizations, offering workshops on entrepreneurship, financial literacy, and personal development. The program was deeply personal, each participant's story echoed pieces of my own. Seeing their determination and hunger for change reminded me of the man I had been, and the person I had fought to become. An unexpected reunion brought my journey full circle. During one of these workshops, a man approached me. He was older now, but I recognized him instantly, the stranger who had given me the $50 bill that had sparked my transformation. He smiled as I recounted how that single gesture had set everything in motion. It was a humbling moment, one that reinforced the profound impact of seemingly small acts of kindness. With the business flourishing, I turned my focus to broader societal impact. I established a foundation dedicated to supporting education and entrepreneurship in underserved communities. The foundation funded scholarships, provided seed capital for small businesses, and created spaces where aspiring entrepreneurs could access resources and mentorship. The ripple effect of these efforts was profound, and each success story fueled my commitment to the cause. Yet, even in this season of giving back, challenges arose. Balancing the demands of the business with the responsibilities of the foundation tested my limits. There were moments when I felt stretched too thin, unsure if I could maintain the momentum I had worked so hard to build. In those times, I leaned on the lessons that had carried me through my darkest days: focus on the essentials, delegate effectively, and never lose sight of the bigger picture. As the years passed, the business evolved into an entity far beyond what I had imagined. It became a hub of innovation and community engagement, a place where people from all walks of life could find opportunities and inspiration. The team, once a handful of individuals, grew into a diverse, dynamic force united by shared values and a common vision. They didn't just work for the business, they were its heart and soul. One of the most fulfilling aspects of this phase was witnessing the ripple effect of the opportunities we created. Employees who had joined the business at entry-level positions went on to become leaders in their own right, mentoring others and spearheading initiatives that expanded our reach. Their growth felt like a reflection of my own journey, proof that with the right support and determination, anyone could rise. Reflecting on my path, I often thought about the choices I had made along the way. Each decision, to take a risk, to persevere through failure, to prioritize integrity, had shaped the trajectory of my life. I had learned that success wasn't about avoiding adversity, it was about using it as a catalyst for growth. And while the accolades and financial achievements were gratifying, they were not the measure of my fulfillment. True success lay in the impact I had made on others and the legacy I was building. As I stood on a stage one evening, addressing an audience at a community gala, I shared my story in its entirety for the first time. From the desperation of homelessness to the triumphs of entrepreneurship, I laid bare the struggles, failures, and victories that had defined my journey. The room was silent as I spoke, the weight of my words settling over the crowd. When I finished, the applause was thunderous, but what mattered most were the conversations that followed, the people who approached me, inspired to pursue their own dreams despite their circumstances. In the quiet moments after the event, I reflected on the arc of my life. The stranger who had given me $50 all those years ago had set me on a path I could never have imagined. His act of kindness had sparked a chain reaction that had transformed not only my life, but the lives of countless others. It was a reminder that no matter how small a gesture might seem, its impact could be immeasurable. As I walked back to my office that night, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. The journey had come full circle, and while there were still challenges ahead, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. My story was not just mine, it was a testament to the power of resilience, the importance of community, and the limitless potential within each of us to create change.